welcome. My name is Kate Jennings with the Office of Engagement, and I'm pleased to welcome UVA alumni, friends, and families for today's webinar, The Future of AI in Higher Education, with Phil Bourne, Dean of the School of Data Science, and Ken Ono, the STEM advisor to the Provost, and Marvin Rosenblum, Professor of Mathematics. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording to anyone who has registered once that becomes available. During today's presentation, if you would like to submit questions to the panelists, you may use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the presentation, our panelists will try to answer as many questions as time allows after the main discussion. At this time, I would like to invite Phil Bourne to turn on his camera. Phil is the founding dean of the School of Data Science and professor of biomedical engineering. And Phil, you can take it away. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Kate. So it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the School of Data Science. Let me begin by introducing Ken Ono, who of late I've been seeing a fair bit of, which I guess tells you something, A, about STEM, and B, about what we're going to be talking about today, which of course is AI as it relates to higher education. So Ken Ono currently holds the title of Thomas Jefferson Professor of Mathematics at the University of Virginia, and is also Vice President of the American Mathematical Society and Chair of the Mathematics section in the AAAS. Previously, Ken held positions at University of Wisconsin-Madison and Emory University, completing a BA University of Chicago, I won't say when, and a PhD at UCLA in Los Angeles. He specializes in number theory, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation today. So let just give you a little context about what we're hoping to do here. First of all, this is a talk about artificial intelligence as it relates to higher ed, but I don't think you can really consider it without the broader context of the changes that are going on with respect to particularly technology and types of technology in our society, and how when you take all of that together, it's really a much more of a holistic change. In fact, that change has been called a Promethean moment by the likes of Thomas Friedman. And also, Bill Gates said it's the most important, the recent events in AI are the most important thing since the invention of the graphical user interface. I'm not sure I would necessarily relate this to Windows and other related tools, but nevertheless, it's clearly what's got you here today to listen into this. And I think I'm asking a lot of people why now? Because to be honest, some of this has been around for quite some time, and we'll get into a little of that. But really, it's about these tools like ChatGPT. And I think it's really the G that's really got people going, which is the generative part. So suddenly you're in this situation where you can sit and you can pose a question, and it's a little unnerving when you get an English or near English answer in prose that is actually being generated by computer code and a computer. And I think that human-computer interaction is what is driving people to pay particular attention to this, even though these developments have been ongoing for a while. So the process here is that Ken will give you a little sort of overview, the context of our discussion, and where we've come from and where we're going with these technologies and how they impact what we're doing in higher ed. And then I'll give you just a brief view of at least one imaginary future that is coming, perhaps quicker than we think, with respect to these AI and the other technologies. And then we'll address your questions, as Kate has pointed out in the chat. So looking forward to hearing what Ken has to say and then having a robust discussion with your questions. So over to you, Ken, and thank you for being here.
Okay, my pleasure, Phil. So welcome to all of you who's out there in the virtual universe. I have a short PowerPoint presentation that I would like to share with you. So here it is. And this PowerPoint will will help us begin this conversation. And so how do I slideshow play from start? So here is my cover slide, the future of higher education with artificial intelligence. And if you notice on this cover slide, the title overlays old handwriting. It's actually a manuscript, a mathematical manuscript that is over 100 years old. It's very important in my field. But I want to begin with that because many of our core areas of research have long histories. And despite the fact we're going to be talking about the future, we certainly cannot forget the past. So I want to begin with this lovely cover slide. So as Phil mentioned a moment ago, we're having quite an extraordinary moment. Before last October, the words ChatGPT, Jasper, Google Bard, they may not have been known to you. Okay, but certainly over the last 5 or 6 months, your social feeds, your news feeds are populated perhaps many times a day with incredible stories about artificial intelligence. And so let's begin by saying, well, maybe the future is already here. And let's see what we hope that the university and all of higher education, what these entities will look like as we come to grips with these new tools. So I'd like to start very slowly. This is the hand-waving version of what AI is and what higher education will look like in the future. This is just for the purposes of framing. So what is AI? Loosely speaking, this is an umbrella term that covers deep learning, machine learning, and large language models. These are terms that are bantered about quite freely. And you've seen, I'm sure, many examples of the output of these entities. Why now? Well, we live in an age where extensive computer power and massive data processing fuels algorithms with astonishing results. And one brief way of describing what's happening is that we live in a day and age where we can almost access the accumulation of all of human knowledge in almost real time. If you remember when you first did your first Google search, you might have been surprised that Google had this algorithm that would sort web pages rather quickly, giving you the information that you need. And that was kind of a striking moment. Well, this is a different level of that kind of scientific advance. There are a few differences because part of artificial intelligence is that these algorithms can adapt, they can self-correct, and they can learn. And in particular, what these algorithms are quite good at is that they're very good at recognizing patterns. For example, in writing and in speech. The generative portions, the generative description of AI is based on our ability to tell a computer how to search and rapidly recognize patterns in a way that allows them to predict what would be a next good choice of word, for example, in its writing. But this point, I think, is important to me. I don't know if Phil would agree, or if others would agree, but for me, at this particular point in time, I'd like to think of artificial intelligence presently as recognition, but it's not really cognition. You may see articles in the news talking about whether AI is presently sentient or not. I prefer to use this language, recognition versus cognition, and I'll expand on that as I proceed here. So what can AI do? Well, it can do lots of things, and you've seen examples of this in the news. ChatGPT is passing exams. A few months ago, ChatGPT could pass advanced undergraduate math tests. But now with ChatGPT 4, it can pass the California bar. Not with a stellar score, but it can pass. What does AI do in industry? So many different things. AI as a tool, a partner, a tool that is a partner, is already finding its way across disciplines in industry, in human resources departments, in insurance companies, and law firms. Anywhere where you can automate a narrow or formulaic task could be a target of opportunity for artificial intelligence. And as is well known now by the examples that we've illustrated, AI can even write basic computer code. As has been mentioned before, what Phil said a moment ago, you could ask ChatGPT a question, and in response, you'll get something that resembles a well-written essay. These AI tools have an uncanny ability to write. And in particular, what AI can do is it can help make predictions based on the data it mines, and AI can also be programmed to make decisions. Now, this is something that we should be concerned about, but make no mistake, certainly AI can do all of these things that are listed on the screen. So as a result, there are some natural concerns. So I hope you can follow along with my cursor. There's some concerns and points that I'd like to make at the outset. One thing that I think is very important is that we shouldn't mistake AI for being human, despite the fact that the responses these entities offer sounds very human. Let's not anthropomorphize our computers and these algorithms. They are not human. And in particular, many of the examples that people kind of chuckle about in social media, hey, ChatGPT didn't know this, or this. Well, part of the reason it's funny is because, well, AI doesn't know when it's wrong. So in view of these first 2 points, not making the mistake that AI is human, combined with the fact that AI doesn't know when it's wrong, we have to ask, what's under the hood? When one of these entities offers us an answer or text or art or any of its outputs, we always have to wonder, what was it what were the steps? What did the algorithm actually do? What's under the hood that led to the result? I know one thing that's very important to Phil and should be important to all of us. Recently, the School of Data Science hosted Kathy O'Neill, a world famous data scientist, well known for her book, Weapons of Math Destruction. I think this book came out 6 or 7 years ago, and it already predicted the future in the sense that there are ethical implications of relying too much on predictive algorithms. So in particular, biases, racial, gender, and so on, misinformation can be reinforced. You see, these AI tools can only mine the data that it's trained on, and whatever is included in that data has the danger of being reinforced. So who checks? Who checks these results? Are the tech companies putting up the guardrails? Some are, but are we comfortable with the guardrails that have been put in place? And in terms of policy for universities, school systems, and perhaps our government leaders, who determines ethics in AI? So I think these are all important concerns. So what does the future hold? Well, I think some things are very clear about what the future holds because it's already happening now. Some jobs will disappear and others will be streamlined. We should be preparing for, and we are already entering labor markets, which are hybrid labor markets where AI will play a significant role. I think the term that I would like to use is that AI will be a strong partner for making human decisions. What does that mean? Well, there will be a growing demand for human reviewers who will make a final review or adapt or improve results that AI produces. And in particular, it's absolutely clear, we're already seeing it now, a brief scan of job advertisements across disciplines indicates a growing demand for those with experience in machine learning. So in terms of the future of higher education, what does AI offer us, say at the University of Virginia, for your high schools, for public schools? What does AI offer? Well, AI certainly offers quite a bit in terms of administrative support, automation. AI can help us with enrollment and scheduling, grading, and retention of students, right? AI is fast, has rapid access to data. Certainly in terms of facilities management, AI is going to be wonderful. If the Wi-Fi goes down, your AI system will know it before you might get a report. Power, water, the facilities that it takes to run institutions. This last bullet point is particularly important in this day and age. AI can help us provide more universal access to education. If you have access to the internet, you should be in a situation where you have greater access to higher education. Some more benefits in higher education. Well, what do we do in higher education? We teach. And students and others learn. So what about the benefits in higher education with regard to teaching support? Well, AI is a wonderful partner if used properly. So AI can offer new assistive technology in so many different ways. So let me just offer you one example. AI could read documents for the visually impaired. Data analytics, and Phil will tell you data is everywhere. That's not an exaggeration. We are in the era of big data. And how can big data analytics be useful in higher education? It could be useful in an advisory role, right? We can use our data analytics to help advise educators of best practices. There'll be much less of reinventing the wheel by teachers in different schools, in different communities across the world. Continuous updating of references and resources. That's wonderful, right? You don't have to worry about having documents or references that are up to date because the AI will do that for us. For teachers, many are already doing this. Teachers can use AI in their lesson planning and test preparation, lecture transcription, and plagiarism detection. This is the teaching support. So I think all of these bullet points indicate how AI could be an assistive partner for teachers. In terms of learning and research support, as a research mathematician, I still use pencil and paper. I use my computer largely for email or Zoom meetings like this. But you might wonder, in what way would AI be useful to me? I'll tell you in a moment, but let's first go through some of these bullet points. So AI could be, and already does, play a role in assisting what's called adaptive learning, tailored education, precision education, right? So as students or classes work through a body of material, the computer can keep track of student progress, keep track of where errors were made, and fire off questions or tailor homework assignments to help students learn. That's wonderful. This is actually very much in the air. People talk about precision medicine. We should be talking about, and we are talking about, precision education. You can get personalized supplemental guidance, homework, office hours, fine-tuned to a student's needs. This next point is, I think, worrisome to many, but maybe not as worrisome as it should be. Writing. Because these AI tools have this uncanny ability to write, does it mean that we will no longer place as much value in strong writing skills? No, actually, I don't think that's true at all, as long as we train and offer our classes in an appropriate way. Instead, I think that the apps that students use can improve writing. You can design assignments so that perhaps an AI tool will first give you an approximation to an essay, and students can update and improve the essay by adding details, so on and so forth. And I certainly have friends and colleagues who are already doing this. As a researcher, this last bullet point is very important. For me in mathematics, and I think scientists and anyone who needs to access large bodies of information, they can tell you that AI tools have a very strong ability to sift through large data sets, identify patterns, build models, and for researchers, recommend articles that should be studied in mind for future research, as well as assisting with manuscript preparation. A few weeks ago, the prestigious journal Nature, one of the most prestigious journals in science called Nature, had an op-ed about the role of AI in manuscript preparation. Should ChatGPT be a co-author? So conversations like this are ongoing. We certainly haven't settled that debate. But the fact that we are having this debate already indicates that many, even first-class researchers, are using artificial intelligence tools as a partner in their research. So I'm beginning to wrap up here, higher education in the future. Well, what are our core principles? I talked about some concerns, but what should the core principles be as we move forward? Well, transparency might be a word that we overuse, but it's a perfect word. Transparency with regard to data collection, how we handle intellectual property rights, right? If it's in the internet, does everybody own it? Data security, that's something that we're all concerned about. And privacy, how do we deal with transparency and these various issues, not just in higher education, but as a society? How will higher education change in the future? Well, this is already happening. As Phil can tell you in the School of Data Science, right? The School of Data Science is offering its services across grounds at the University of Virginia, right? Data is everywhere. But I think that's just the beginning. I imagine a future where high schools, all schools, in particular the University of Virginia, becomes increasingly transdisciplinary. And my hope would be that our graduates are well-versed quite broadly in math, machine learning, deep learning, programming, data science, ethics, writing, business management, and the traditional cores. Now, I'm not saying our students should major in all of these areas, of course not, but a truly educated who should be someone who is aware of the possibilities offered by each of these entities, who then chooses to major or double major in the fields that interest them most. And at the university level, and I think that's part of what the engagement program is all about. And I think I speak for Jim because Jim has his very important mantra to be great and good in all that we do. As a public university, supporting not just the Commonwealth, but the world, the larger world, UVA, like all of universities like UVA, we need to grow our partnerships. We need to build our collaborations with both industry and the public sector, as I think universities will be even more important as we head off into this complicated future. And lastly, I think we really want to talk about what AI does not do. That first concern I had was that please do not mistake your AI for being human. Right, we joke about, hey Siri, play such and such on Spotify for me while I'm driving my car. But certainly that's all that Siri does for me when I drive my car. She's not going to tell me how to deal with my emotions or plan for my next research project. These are things that universities are equipped to do. This is what our faculty are equipped to do. So moving forward in higher education, we need to place greater emphasis on the human. Creativity, compassion, emotion, and socialization in all of the fields. So to wrap up, I just have one last slide and I'll turn it over to Phil. So I assembled 9 little squares here that I think summarize my little presentation. What will higher education look like in the future? Some of these things are already happening. I think we want to encourage our students to engage with AI because these are wonderful tools, right? When I was growing up, we still had a card catalog in the library, one card for every book in the library. How crazy is that? Okay, we've come so far from that. And these AI tools represent the next leap, an incredible leap. As educators, we want to emphasize creativity, originality, and style. We want to put greater emphasis on the human. For this third box, I've been a strong supporter for this my entire career. We definitely want to favor context over content. It's not just about, for example, in a math class, getting the answer right. What were the steps that were implemented to get there? Because let's face it, if you earn a degree in mathematics, at any level, it's not true that the only kind of math questions you're going to get are of the flavor, Farmer John has 100 feet of fence, find the maximum area of the field that he can enclose with his 100 feet, right? That's a math problem, okay? But Farmer John rarely has that math problem. but the context and the tools that help us solve these problems, that's what matters. AI isn't perfect, so I think that greater emphasis should be placed on how, as the user, we can learn to use AI in the best possible way. So learn AI prompt engineering. In terms of writing, I alluded to this earlier. I think a wonderful skill for our students, for all of us, would be to learn how to improve AI generated responses to perfect them. Definitely, again, going back to my third square, but I emphasize it again here in this square. Let's emphasize both the process and the product, because if we want our students to be best equipped, to be flexible, to solve complicated problems as they arise in their work, well, the process is certainly going to be important. I mentioned this several times. We should view AI as a learning partner. We should all be developing our own awareness of AI strengths and weaknesses. And my last point here is something I hope we can all embrace. AI is a multiplier. As an assistant, it will help us multiply our quantity, helping us become much more productive, as well as the quality. AI will save us time. All that library research that you would have done on Google can be streamlined, allowing you, freeing up more time for the human part, the creativity or originality, and so on. So Phil, I turn it over to you. These are my thoughts on what I think higher education can look like in the future. And the floor is yours, Phil.
Thank you, Ken. Much appreciated. I really enjoyed your notion of how you stated recognition and not cognition. I think that's such an important aspect of where we are. And looking at the questions that have come in, that I think that kind of concern that in fact it is cognition is something you've addressed and something we should talk about in a minute. But it did make me think of, there's a fellow, Terry Sanowski, who I've collaborated with in the past, who's both a neuroscientist and a computer scientist at UC San Diego and the Salk Institute. He had a beautiful recent paper where he looks at exactly where we are today. If you take the deep learning models, the best we have, they're equivalent roughly of 1 square centimeter of brain tissue, of which we have exceedingly more than that. Plus, of course, we have morphological functions that within the brain, which are very different to the basic neural networks, which is how these tools predominantly operate. So it's very clear that that there is no comparison, and there will be no comparison within the near future. But at the same time, there's certain disquiet about what these tools can do, and I think it really behooves us to pay attention to it. But if I want to sort of move on to a sort of positive aspect, I'll just share my screen here, and sort of just give you, hopefully you can see that, I'll give you a couple of scenarios. If you think about what happens in universities, in higher ed, it's about teaching, it's about research, and it's about service and community. So I'm just going to give you 3 quick examples of how I at least see the future of AI with respect to those areas which are so important to what we do in the university. So let's start with education, and let's start with a history lesson and what that's going to look like 5 to 10 years from now. First of all, let's assume we're looking at the history of Thomas Jefferson. Well, we're fortunate to have some unique writings from Thomas Jefferson. Also, of course, he wrote a lot of things himself, plus much has been written about him. If you take that collective corpus and and then increasingly that's in a digital form, and this relates to Ken's comment about data everywhere. I would just add to that it's not just data everywhere, it's digital data everywhere, which gives us the ability to manipulate it en masse. So if you take this corpus and then you imagine in the days to come, for those of you who are experimenting with virtual reality headsets, you'll know that it's already here. It's the price point makes it usable. I wouldn't say that it's everything I would want it to be at this point, but it's clearly part of the future. You could actually, using these tools, these so-called natural language processing tools, you could actually build a social network of Thomas Jefferson. So what I've represented here is a timeline of Jefferson's life with all these interaction points of how he interacted with other people at different time points in his life. You could then look at that in the context of, you could zoom in using your your virtual reality headset to a point on October the 6th, 1817, and you would see that was the time at which the cornerstone of the University of Virginia was laid. And then through this social network, you could see who was present, and you could see that indeed Madison and Monroe were both there with Jefferson for that laying of the cornerstone. And so you could then use ChatGPT to actually have a simulated conversation between these three folks, and you could actually act and play role any one of those three and in a simulated conversation around the laying of the cornerstone. If that's not enough, you could then, using your virtual reality headset, you could actually simulate over time, beyond the timeline and beyond Jefferson's death, to the emergence from the cornerstone to the academical village and subsequently all of the University of Virginia. Think about learning history in that context. It's just a completely different way with a variety of tools, but much of it related and based on AI. But it certainly is going to require different ways of teaching. I think it also opens up the question of the haves and the have-nots with respect to this technology. It's the digital divide, and I think we need to be paying very careful attention to where that leads. But if that's not enough, what becomes really scary, if it's not just a compelling way to learn, imagine and learn, then I think it gets even scarier when you see what you can do yourself. So here is a depiction of me in a deep fake, where I could actually have been participating in that conversation with Jefferson, this simulated conversation. This was actually made by my son, who actually works for a company. He used to work for Industrial Light and Magic in London, and now is working on generating in real time these kind of imageries for the movies that are to come. And I think it's both a positive and negative effect of what's going to happen. Looking at me, it's definitely a negative effect. But in any case, let's look at the, moving teaching aside, let's look at the future as it relates to research. So there's an interesting model for how research has evolved over the millennia. And that's we're now in the fourth paradigm of research. So the first paradigm was very much what we observed empirically, and that went on from time immemorial to about the 16th century. Then we started to introduce model-based theoretical science, the laws of thermodynamics, Newton's laws of motion, and so on. And so that was then the second paradigm. And that went on to like 400 years or so, 300 or 400 years. And then we had the third paradigm, which computational and computer science, that really only came in the 50s. And then since 2000, so all of this, as you can see, is accelerating. We're having all these paradigms of research that are now based on so-called big data, as Ken was alluding to. And all of this is happening very quickly in this compressed time frame. And that's, the so-called fourth paradigm is where we are today. We could talk a little about what the fifth paradigm is. That's another time. But how does that then relate to research? And I'm going to give you an example quickly from my own research at a very high level. And this is actually something that has happened already. So this is a profound change in research that has happened because of the development of AI techniques. And it was done by a company called DeepMind in London that is actually a spin-off of Alphabet and Google that's devoted to applying these kinds of techniques to research. And the problem that they solved is a problem that's existed in biology from forever, and it's called the protein folding problem. And if you remember back to your basic biology, effectively the proteins are the building blocks of life, and how those proteins organize themselves in 3 dimensions defines a lot of how life works. Trying to predict the structure of those has been extremely difficult until recently. It would involve a highly complex set of experiments that would took literally months to years to actually get one of these. Now, DeepMind have developed AI algorithms that can do this essentially in real time. And the implications of that led to it being considered the breakthrough of the year by Science magazine in 2021. Now, you ask yourself, if that's the case, is it going to be that this group of people, this is potentially Nobel Prize material? And partly because of the implications that it has in drug discovery, in food production, in biomaterials and biofuels, among many other things. So this has now become a tool in the armory of researchers in basic biology to make fundamental change. And of course, like so many of these developments, there's also a potential nefarious side of it as well. You can potentially engineer proteins that have so-called gain of function, which could actually have, in other words, change beyond what nature has produced already, to have both positive effects, but also negative effects. And then finally, just quickly, community engagement, how we think about how we engage with communities through this kind of work, which is also the work of the university. And of course, we have programs that are doing this now. Just some examples, we have 200 people that are now part of Code for Charlottesville, where we've reached out into the community to start teaching folks how to actually effectively develop and use these kind of tools for what we are very set on in the school, which of course is for societal benefit. But it's clear, and Ken alluded to this with respect to precision health, which is now an integral part of what we're doing at the university, but there's also precision learning, which is really looking at how we take care of ourselves, how we learn, not as a group, but as individuals based on a large available amount of data on each of us that can be used effectively to actually provide, in the case of health, suggestions for better health that's really geared not towards everyone taking so much dose of a given drug, but really what kind of drug and how much and what combination with other drugs in ways that have just not been possible before. So it's a watershed for what's to come. And so I think, it's both exciting, but also worrying in the same context because of the downside of what could actually happen here. So Ken, if you can come back, we have some questions in the chat. And so I think it would be a good opportunity to get into some of that with our audience have provided. And I'm looking at the theme of what's come in rather than any individual particular person, but let me just cite one, and then maybe we can have a little discussion around the general theme, which is the threat that this represents to current types of employment. And this one is, I run a college writing center. I teach writing as well as creative writing, literature composition, and so forth. And I'm wondering about both the threats and the opportunity. Programs like ChatGPT pose to writing centers or tutoring generally. What's the impact? I'm already preparing for more diversified assignments that try to get at the thinking traditional writing assignments require. But like many, I'm wondering what my profession's future is, both as a writing teacher and as a writing tutor. So, you want to comment on that as an example? I have something to say about it as well.
Phil, I'll let you go first. I'm still trying to figure out how to read the Q&A here.
Oh, this was not actually in the Q&A. This was what was. So keep trying. Oh, people had the opportunity when they registered for this to submit questions. So I'm starting with a few of those.
Yeah, so this is a significant concern to me. Although I don't teach courses that require very much writing, I do offer some writing assignments. I do have friends who've thought quite a bit about how programs like ChatGPT should, well, how to modify the mode of instruction and grading in the presence of this AI. And I alluded to this earlier. Some of our faculty offer assignments where they will have AI answer a proposed essay question, respond with a short, maybe 300-word answer, and then the task would be to craft that into a 2,000-word essay, how to improve and expand upon these responses. And so I think that's the writing component. I think another part of this question was about how this would impact jobs of the future. Well, I can give you one example where ChatGPT has helped me in a menial task. So in my work as a researcher, I sometimes co-organize conferences, professional meetings. And when you have a professional meeting, you would invite, say, 40 or 50 speakers, and you'll divide them into their various sections based on their areas of interest. And this is really quite hard to do. But you could ask ChatGPT to come up with who are 10 leaders in the field of this kind of, say, mathematics versus that kind of mathematics. And as a tool, it saves me from, well, it greatly streamlines my work. Doesn't change the final decision. And I know these entities aren't perfect. For example, these entities have a timestamp. So the most recent advance in a field, if it's in the last 3 months, ChatGPT won't know it, but there's a good chance I would because of the grapevine. But that's an example of how these AI tools can assist me in my research.
I mean, I think this person should really think about it. And I actually think about it almost like it's an advanced version of a thesaurus, that it's really a facilitator. It's a tool that's facilitatory. And it really, but it's such a powerful tool that it does, in fact, change how you think about teaching the field in terms of really being complementary to new capabilities. And but at the same time, I mean, at least I use it now quite routinely. I couldn't, for example, at this point, come anywhere near close to writing any kind of review or that was based on ChatGPT of a collection of material, because it's just nowhere near that good. And it's not clear that it ever will be relative to what human intuition can add to those reviews. But it does ramp things up a notch. And I think how we think about it in that context is how the teachers should be thinking about using it in how they teach. So moving on, let's move to another question. I think it's about the policies that need to be put in place. So this is something you alluded to, Ken, with respect to how people like Cathy O'Neill and Weapons of Mass Destruction have looked at these developments. And clearly there's benefit, but there's also nefarious aspects, and we need policies to actually address these things. And unfortunately, of course, the policies tend to move slower than the technologies themselves. I have to say, I'm kudos to our institution that in terms of policies that we might put in place ourselves to address issues around the use of AI. As you know, there's a task force that's been meeting and had a series of town halls. And in the June timeframe, they'll be producing a report that then will be made public to all within the university. And that will lead to our own consideration of these things. And I think that's a really important step, and I'm pleased to see that's happening. But I think more broadly, we actually need something akin, and others certainly have brought this up, akin to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration. We sort of need like a federal AI administration to put the appropriate constraints and checks and balances, which would then in itself foster a whole series of development of tools to actually facilitate how we think and use these AI capabilities. So I don't know this was a theme that ran through a number of the questions. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or other ways that you see this technology being regulated or overseen.
Right. So I'm one of the advantages to these Zoom meetings is that I can look at some of my old notes that I used to prepare my slides. So there are a few things that I'd like to mention that I think will add some context. Rubrics. We talk about requiring rubrics. And I think the task force that Bree Gertler has assembling will do exactly something like this. I think we want to establish rubrics that prioritize non-AI virtues, right? Talk about what it means to be human, emphasize the style, originality, so on and so forth. The rubric should also address, I predict that they will address ethics in education, right? What do we mean now by plagiarism if ChatGPT, for example, is a tool that was used to help assemble an essay? I don't have those answers today, but I think it's fairly likely that these reports moving forward will address these issues. How do we combat misinformation? We will need to have policy on that. And on top of that, things like conflict of interest, biases. How do we address those? So I don't have those answers for you today, but we're in very capable hands. Many on grounds are discussing these issues. And if you have a strong opinion, I think those opinions would be welcome. So feel free to share them either with us or directly with the Provost's office. Yeah, those are some thoughts that I kind of want to reinforce.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm looking at a series of others. Been a lot of activity in the Q&A. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I mean, I think and I'm trying to sort of encapsulate multiple questions in one go. I mean, part of it is, and there was a very interesting article just today, actually, in the New York Times about it's the notion of the threat that this represents. And obviously in higher ed, we have a role to play to actually educate, to mitigate such threats. But it really came in sort of three levels. There was the immediate, the intermediate, and the long term. The immediate is how we really respond to and how we use these tools right today. The second was how it impacts society in the midterm in terms of reallocation of jobs and this kind of thing. And then the third was really the longer term of when the potential of these tools to actually take over the world, so to speak, which is a sort of science fiction fantasy that people talk about. But certainly, one of the Hinton, one of the fathers of AI, just today, also in the paper, actually raised this as an issue and has left Google to actually promote more sensitive and freeing himself from the constraints of the private sector to speak freely about how he feels about these things going forward. So I think there is really cause for concern, and I think we have a role as educators within this framework to really present a balanced picture of good and bad, or what potentially can come from this. Within our own school, if I may just sort of mention that for a moment, is we talk about value, which is how we think about, in a broader sense, data science, which of course is AI is a distinct part of, is how we balance the between the value that can come from using these tools versus the negative aspects that can take place. And we think about every single course we offer in the context of that balance. And we try to make sure that the students have a really balanced picture and think about it in every aspect. And it starts by thinking about the data that was fed into these models, which is where the bias and other issues come into play and have been for quite some time. To how we ultimately, any bias that's in the algorithm itself, and then the bias that exists in how we actually present the results, how the human computer interface to the output, the visualization of what we're seeing, how is that a fair depiction of what's being said, what's being analyzed and generated by these models. And all of that has to come into play. But I think ultimately it really starts with how we think about the data that goes into these models. And what's starting to happen now, which I think is a really encouraging aspect, is that, and this goes to some of the other questions that related to, basically deep fakes and the notion that we're getting false information from these models, is a lot of it comes out false by virtue of what's actually fed into them. Right. So what you're starting to see is more controlled corpus being used to actually feed the models. An example in my own field would be there's a resource called PubMed and PubMed Central, which is essentially all the biomedical literature, and it's all the peer-reviewed literature. Now, that literature doesn't actually necessarily define the strict answers, but it's the best representation from experts at any given point in time. And when you actually build generative models based on that corpus as opposed to the internet as a whole, you start to see different and, by expert opinion, significantly better results. So I think you're going to start to see more and more of these kind of trusted data sources being used to train models, rather than what you see with ChatGPT and other similar tools, which is really scraping the whole internet. I don't know whether in the mathematical realm this is going on at this point, or how you see, Ken, the sort of how we control and improve the modeling that takes place.
Right. So time is running short, so I'll answer that first, but there are a couple other points I'd like to make. In pure mathematics evolves in glacial timescales. So in terms of developing data sets where we have confidence that biases have been removed, that's not. I have to be honest. That hasn't really emerged yet as a priority. But in terms of AI tools, if you're familiar with the need for proving theorems in mathematics, AI is playing a much larger role and a growing role, an expanding role, where AI is checking mathematical papers for their correctness, the refereeing component, right? So unlike the lab sciences, where you're unable to perhaps exactly reproduce a lab experiment that's the source of a paper, in mathematics, we need to be able to reproduce the proof. And computers, I feel like I must say, are playing a growing role in that realm. Turning to what you said a moment ago about the training of these AI tools, Robert Hoyt in the chat here, he's correct when he says that the current version of ChatGPT was trained on data that's almost 2 years old. And if I remember correctly, that training cost OpenAI $100 million. So you have to wonder, what will be the limit? Are we already approaching the limit of what these AI tools will look like in the future? Maybe not exactly, but the future of AI certainly will require many new ideas that haven't yet been discovered. And so there was a report that DARPA released, I think 6 years ago, trying to predict what the future of mankind would look like. And they were talking quite a bit about merging man with machine. We're seeing a little bit of that in this virtual reality, but make no mistake, I think AI is far from sentient. And as I mentioned earlier, this is mostly recognition versus cognition.
Yeah, thank you. Again, another theme in the chat is really the sort of the haves and the have-nots, the so-called digital divide that exists, that clearly exists today. The question is whether under the increased use of these tools, whether that divide increases or decreases. I think we certainly have an obligation to minimize that as much as possible. I think an important element of that is, in fact, what's already happening to some degree, at least, which is the openness. So OpenAI has, the fact that, there are limitations, but more or less anyone can go on and use the tools that exist today. And that people are asking questions in the chat about more details about the type of programming tools and so forth. I think we'll try and pull something together around that and post that. But and many of those tools are open and anyone can download and access them. So there is a degree of fairness there, but I think there's still some dangers going forward that of those that have and the have-nots. I don't know, Ken, if we've got like 1 minute left, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I echo your concerns, and I agree that for those who want more specific examples, maybe we can post in the comment section somewhere some more details. For example, our slides, your slides, my slides. So what Phil and I are doing here is the beginning of a long conversation.
Yeah,
this is our mandate.
Yeah, so thank you, Ken. In finishing off, I'll just say that, as I said a bit earlier, I think the university is really, as many in higher ed, are really looking seriously at what this future has to hold. I think we paint a fairly balanced picture about what can happen. There's lots that I think are advantageous, but there's also really causes for concern that I think we're becoming increasingly aware of. And I think the good news is that we're all becoming more aware of this, and we're all acting together to think about how we can make the most positive use of these capabilities, but with and downplaying and really downgrading what can happen in a negative sense. So thank you, Ken, for being part of this. And the School of Data Science clearly has its work cut out for it going forward. And it's not just within the School of Data Science. Clearly, this is going on. AI is going on all over the university now. And it's an exciting time. And I look forward to working with all of you going forward as we try and make the best of it. So thank you very much.
Have a good day, everybody.